off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Hogen Fukunaga. Hogen is the founder of a cult that is often called the foot reading cult. Hogen made claims that he would be able to diagnose people by examining their feet. Other than his potentially false diagnosis, this wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, except for the fact that he charged people $900 for a foot reading. Hogen also claimed to be the world's final savior, third in line after Jesus Christ and Buddha. This cult started in 1980 while Hogen was 34 years old and apparently was more than 500 million yen in debt. Hogen would read people's feet and then tell them their problems, but would say these issues could only be fixed if they attended a cult seminar, which would cost them 2.25 million yen, or if they donated 14.3 million yen to the cult. I feel like this red flag should have been more than enough to warn people, but at one point the group claimed to have 30,000 members. Hogen was eventually arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud, and the cult went bankrupt. In our number 7 spot today, we have Rael. Rael is a French journalist who is also the founder of what is called the Realism movement, which is a UFO cult. Apparently, Rael had some sort of extraterrestrial encounter in December of 1973, and this is what led him to found this movement. Rael says that during his alien encounter, the alien told him that he was the chosen one, and he needed to spread the message to the people on Earth. This UFO cult believes that humans were created by an alien species, and once we find a way to find peace on Earth, those aliens will come down and tell us our true origins and bring us utopia. It seems as though Rael now lives in Canada, and he still continues to spread his message. In our number 6 spot today, we have Larry Ray. Larry Ray is a man who, after being released from prison, moved into his daughter's college dorm room in 2010. Larry and his daughter painted him to be some kind of hero and protector and convinced the other people in the dorm that the government was just out to get him, and that's how he was allowed to move into the dorm. After moving in, he slowly began to manipulate and prey on the people who lived there, isolating them from their friends and family, and began giving them serious and incorrect diagnoses such as schizophrenia. He began to control everything they all did, such as when they ate, what they ate, when they went to sleep, etc., and he would extort them for money, which ended up totaling to more than $1 million. Ray ended up forcing all of these people into his cult, basically without them even realizing what was going on. He was psychologically and physically abusing them, and even went as far as to force some of them into doing things they didn't want to do. Ray ended up being arrested in February of last year and is awaiting trial. He still continues to try and contact his followers, even getting his elderly father to contact some of them for him. In our number 5 spot today, we have Harold Klemp. Harold is actually probably the most normal and least scary person on this list, which truly is a relief. Harold is the leader of the cult of Ekankar, which was originally founded by Paul Twitchell. After Paul passed away, Harold became the new group leader. This group focuses on a lot of spiritual practices and exercises and doesn't have a ton of weird rules when you join. No dietary requirements, no taboo things you're forced into, and you don't even have to leave your current religion or faith to join the group. There have, of course, been extremely problematic members who have done some very questionable things, but not at the command of the group or Harold, to my knowledge. Harold continues to lead the group, and they even have a website, a Twitter page, and a YouTube account. In our number 3 spot today, we have Buffalo Bill Hawkins. Buffalo Bill, who is also known as Yisrael, is the founder of the House of Yahweh. Bill and his brothers say that they were sent by Yahweh to prepare the world for the second coming of the Messiah. They believe that the House of Yahweh is the oldest and only true faith, and that the world is about to experience the Great Tribulation, which is a sign of the end times. They also believe that the Bible refers to Satan as the god of this world. This cult isn't unlike a lot of other religions, and they have their own beliefs and ideologies. Bill has attempted and of course failed to predict the end times throughout the years, the most recent prediction being in 2016. In 2008, Bill was arrested on 4 counts of bigamy, and his bail was originally set at $10 million before it was reduced to $100,000. He ended up being released in 2009 after he pleaded no contest to some other charges that had been laid against him, and he was only given a fine and probation. In our number 1 spot today, we have Karen Zerby. Of course her name is Karen. Don't put that in. Karen is the leader of the cult now known as the Family of Love, but is much better known by its former name, the Children of God. In 1969, Karen joined a group called Teens for Christ and ended up becoming the personal secretary to David Berg, who was the one who founded the group. Eventually, David would divorce his wife in order to marry Karen. Karen had a son named Ricky, and his childhood was made into a book, which was used to show other members of the cult how they should raise their children, but the book included some pretty horrific and disturbing content. At first, Karen wasn't around or extremely active in the cult, but she began to insert herself more and more and began making rules and enforcing discipline. Once David began to get sick in 1988, Karen took over the leadership position that she had been groomed for. After David passed away, she married another leader from the cult. This cult has actually seen a few celebrities over the years. Jeremy Spencer, who was one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac, is a member of this cult. Joaquin Phoenix and his siblings were unfortunately subject to this terrible cult when they were growing up, but they all chose to leave later in life and as adults have spoken out about this cult. Unfortunately, Karen is still active as the cult's leader, even though she most definitely should be in prison.
Coming in at number 9, we have Realism. One click on the Realism website will tell you that the group believes that life on Earth was created by extraterrestrials who were mistaken for gods by our primitive ancestors. Sure, cult founder Claude Verihon has changed his name to Rail. He claims that he had a vision of an alien spacecraft descending over southern France. In his vision, he lived among the aliens for 6 days and was told that Jesus was an alien and that humans were the only hope for the future of the universe. Their judgment day will be given by an alien called Elohim. They believe in topless rights for women, which, you know, I'm pretty pro freeing the nip. But what makes realists a bit worrying is that they believe that they are way more intelligent than other people, and they're very pro-human cloning. Now, I am pro-science, but their methods do seem a bit dubious. They claim that they cloned a baby and they named her Eve. They're also keen to implant memories and personalities from one person into a clone. It's kind of like the premise of Get Out, which was a very worrying movie indeed. Now, the Vatican have specifically spoken out against this cult, and they really don't like their ideas for cloning practices.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Angel's Landing. In the early 2000s, a man named Daniel Perez, or Lou Castro, led a cult that lived at Angel's Landing. They all lived on a 20-acre property outside of Wichita, Kansas. Now, Perez had control of these followers because he convinced them that he was an angel and a seer that could look into the future and know exactly when they were going to die. Obviously, that was false. In reality, he would kill off his followers and use their life insurance policies to become rich. He was getting away with it for a while until police looked into the death of one of his followers, Patricia Hughes. In 2003, her dead body was found on the compound. Then in 2006, her husband mysteriously passed away. This all led the police back to Perez, who had changed his identity to Lou Castro. Eventually, he was caught and sentenced to 80 years in prison for the lengthy list of his disturbing crimes he committed. Yikes. In our 9th spot today, we have the Children of God. Formed in 1968, the Children of God, now referred to as the Family International, is a cult that believes in salvation and spiritual revolution and happiness. But as the group got a big following, their beliefs shifted. From there, the followers were forced to engage in dark practices, like having the females lure men into the cult by having intercourse with them. Sadly, the followers were often mistreated in multiple ways. One woman who was a part of this cult as a child referred to it as living hell. It literally traumatized her. 31 people died at the hands of this cult. And like I said, it's still active, but in 2004 just changed its name to Family International. Moving on to number 8, we have the Brethren. This one is quite interesting. So the Brethren have also been given the name the Body of Christ, or Brothers and Sisters, and even Garbage Eaters. Why? Well, you're about to find out, that's for sure. So for starters, this cult believes that the end of the world is near, and so they are told they have to purify themselves in preparation for the end of the world. They do this by selling their possessions and breaking ties with all their family and friends. They then live as vagrants, eating garbage, hardly ever bathing, and never receive any medical treatment. They also do weird jobs to make money, but then any money they earn just goes right into the group. Due to this lifestyle, a number of group members have had serious mental breakdowns, others have sadly taken their lives. Not a cult you would want to be a part of. Honestly, no cult you want to be a part of. Coming in at number 7, we have the Realism. Founded in 1974, this cult believes that life was created by aliens. Yes, you heard me correctly, aliens. These aliens then assumed human form to go check in on Earth and see how things are going. These aliens are said to be people like Jesus or the Buddha. So this cult spends their days worshipping space aliens. The scariest part? In 2000, they claimed that they founded a cloning company and that they managed to successfully clone a human. Literally everyone went nuts, and the White House even got involved in this, even though they never had any proof of the cloning. Unless the White House was like, okay, we'll pay you guys, just give us this device so we can clone people, but it stays between us. Dude, imagine? Okay, like that's freaky. Coming in our 6th spot, we have Matamoros cult, aka the Human Sacrifice Cult. In 1989, a man named Mark Kilroy went missing when out on spring break. Turns out he was kidnapped and then lost his life to this cult. This cult was known to kidnap people and take their lives as a sacrifice. The leader of this cult, Adolo Contanzo, told his members that by doing so, they would become invincible. Why would they need to become invincible? Well, they were not only a cult, but they were also drug dealers as well. But Contanzo promised that they would never be caught by the police so long they continued to harm and sacrifice others. In the end, Contanzo was caught and then was killed in jail. But rumor has it that the cult is still around to this day. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Doomsday cult. Now, this one is pretty vague because there are a number of Doomsday cults out there, but they all pretty much follow the same belief. Now, there are 2 types of Doomsday cults. One that predicts disasters and thinks that the end is near, and the other one tries to destroy the Earth to bring the world to an end. Either way, both are terrifying and you definitely don't want to get mixed up in it. Both cults have been known to brainwash their followers. So they don't believe what the media is telling them and only listen to the lies of their leaders. Either way, they believe that like, hey, we're gonna die soon, or hey, let's try and make everyone die soon. So it's terrifying. Moving on to number 4, we have the Order of the Solar Temple. This cult was born off of the beliefs of the Knights Templar, and is said to be one of the creepiest cults out there. It is believed to have been founded in the late 1970s to early 80s. For the most part, the cult was peaceful. They had some weird beliefs, but they didn't do any harm. That was until 1994, when they believed that a member's son was the Antichrist. As a result, they killed both individuals. Then they enjoyed a Last Supper before taking their own lives by poison. On that day, 53 cult members lost their lives. It's an absolutely terrifying and heartbreaking story. To this day, this cult still exists. Moving on to number 3, we have the Shinriko cult. Founded in 1984 by a man named Shoko Asahara, this is a doomsday cult as well as a terrorist organization. Basically, members of the cult believe that the end of the world was near, but that they were going to be the only survivors. Why? Well, the leader said he had powers and could transfer his spiritual power to his followers to take away their sins. In 1995, this cult carried out the deadly Tokyo subway sarin attack, where 13 people died and thousands got injured. Apparently, this was done as an attempt to start the apocalypse, but also to stop the authorities from shutting down their cult. As a result of this attack, 13 members of the group got the death sentence, including the leader Shoko. After his death, the name of the cult was changed, but to this day, it's still active. The cult was never banned and it has about 1,500 followers. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Church of Scientology. Is the Church of Scientology a cult or a religion? Well, a number of people think that it is indeed a cult. You've probably heard of it because of famous Hollywood star Tom Cruise. He's a very prominent figure in the church. And this cult is certainly one you never want to get involved in. For starters, once you're in, the church will force you to disconnect from people not involved in the cult. This includes your family and your friends. Jenna Miscavige Hill, a member of the church that left in 2005, had this to say about it, and I quote, "I was allowed to see my parents only once a week at best. sometimes not for years. So when you do want to leave, you literally have no one to go back to since you cut them out of your life. That's the other thing, leaving is so difficult. Apparently they will intimidate and harass you into staying. According to another ex-member, they also brainwash their followers. And if anyone misbehaves, they send them to this prison camp, where they are basically worked to death and barely fed to teach them never to be disobedient. There's also rumors that this cult commits crimes and murders, but they're so powerful that they can just get away with it all. If that's not scary, then I don't know what is. Moving on, at number 9 we have the Church Universal and Triumphant. The Church Universal and Triumphant was founded in 1975. It was run by a woman named Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She made her followers believe that she was a channel for God. Apparently, God told her that the world was going to end. So she moved her church compound near Yellowstone National Park for safety reasons. She said that the end of the world would come in 1990 after a nuclear war between the US and Russia. When that didn't happen, a lot of members left the cult. Slowly over time, the cult just dissolved. In our 8th spot, we have William Miller. William Miller was an American Baptist preacher as well as the founder of Adventism. He was known for preaching about the end of the world, which he prophesied would be in 1844. He thought the end would come as a purifying apocalypse so the world would be cleansed of sinners. Miller and his followers, the Millerites, believed that there would be a fire in which saints would be resurrected and they would cleanse the world of this evil. When this didn't happen, he lost his loyal followers. In fact, the day in which the world didn't end is now referred to as the Great Disappointment. In our 7th spot, we have Jim Jones. Jim Jones is known as one of the most famous cult leaders in the world. He was the founder and leader of the People's Temple, which he ran in an isolated area in the Guyanese jungle. He convinced his followers that the government was coming for him and that they were going to start a thermonuclear war. In fact, he believed that on July 15th, 1967, a nuclear attack was going to happen. Alas, it didn't. Anyways, in 1978, he convinced his followers to take their lives. He described this to be a revolutionary act. So on November 18th, his cult leaders drank cyanide-laced punch. Some of them drank it willingly, while others had it forced upon them. In the end, 909 people lost their lives. It was said to be one of the most harrowing tragedies in American history. Coming in at number 6, we have the Branch DVians. This cult was originally founded in 1929 by a man named Victor T. Houteff, and they were a spin-off of the Seventh-day Adventists. Then in 1955, Ben Roden organized the Branch DVians. Later, the cult was controlled by David Koresh. He believed that the end was near. He believed in the several seals from the Bible's book of Revelation. He believed that when the seals were opened, that marked the second coming of Christ and the start of the apocalypse. So David and his cult were preparing for the apocalypse. He claimed that he could speak to God, and that's what God told him to do, to prepare. But things ended badly in 1993 when the FBI and military stormed the cult's base. They had belief that the group was stockpiling illegal weapons, so they conducted a raid. This led to a deadly shootout and ended with their building going up in flames. This resulted in the death of 76 cult members. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Russian Doomsday cult. The Russian Doomsday cult was founded by a man named Pyotr Kuznetsov. He believed that the end of the world was going to happen in 2008. So in 2007, he gathered the 30 members of his group and sent them to a shelter in a cave. He instructed them to wait there until the end of the world. Of course, Pyotr didn't accompany them. After 6 months in the cave, 14 members decided to come out. Sadly, 2 passed away in this cave. 9 members decided to stay a bit longer, but then later came out. In fact, the members were instructed to take their own lives if the authorities tried to intervene. Thankfully, when the police did come to the rescue, they didn't do that. As for Pyotr, well, he tried to take his own life when his doomsday prediction didn't come true. He then was sent to a psychiatric facility. In our 4th spot, we have The Family. Otherwise known as the Great White Brotherhood, this was an Australian New Age group led by a woman named Anne Hamilton. She convinced her followers that she was the reincarnation of Jesus. She also said that Buddha and Krishna were other spiritual beings that came down to help humanity. And of course, they all believed that the end was near. The cult lived away together in the countryside outside of Melbourne. The kids were instructed to never talk to outside people. They were all homeschooled. Those that didn't listen were punished through beatings, starvation, or emotional torture. People there were also frequently drugged with hallucinogenics. In the end, the police raided the cult and saved the 28 children that they had brought in. Anne and the other woman helping her were then criminally charged. And a number of cult members actually sued her for psychiatric and psychological illness, upon other things. It said that she paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to her victims. Moving on to number 3, we have Box Canyon Cult. Located in Southern California, Box Canyon was the perfect rocky hideaway for a Doomsday cult. It all started when a man who went by the name of Krishna Venta claimed that he was the second coming of Christ and was over 240,000 years old. In 1948, he bought 25 acres of land in Box Canyon to build a monastery and several rooms for his followers to stay in. In the monastery, Venta would preach about the impending World War III, which would spark the end of the world. He said that World War III was their chance to take back the world, but they were never able to see their plan through. In 1958, 2 men whose wives joined the cult decided to bomb it. The blast killed them, Venta, and 7 of the followers. Some of the survivors stayed there, whereas others went to join Jim Jones's cult and later passed away there. In our second spot, we have the Order of the Solar Temple. This cult was formed in 1984 by Joseph DiMambro and Luc Jouret. It started off its teachings based on New Age spiritualism, but they realized that they got more followers when they started to become more Doomsday focused. And then these followers brought them more money, so they loved that. So they believed that once the end of the world came, they would be transported to another planet and then live there. Now, the history of what went down in this cult is very complex, so I'm just going to do a quick rundown. In the 1990s, authorities started to investigate this group. In 1994, a man and his family were killed after speaking out about the cult. Days later, 2 temple buildings in Switzerland burned to the ground. 48 bodies were found inside. Some were shot, others were injected with tranquilizers and left to perish in the fire. Then in 1995, a building in the Swiss Alps burnt down. 16 bodies were found inside there. Then in 1997, a building in Quebec burnt down. 5 more members died then. In total, 74 cult members passed away. To this day though, this cult still exists.
Starting off this list, we have the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. This cult with the catchiest name was founded in Uganda by 4 ex-Roman Catholic priests, 2 ex-nuns, and 1 former sex worker, and it was initially said to really emphasize the 10 Commandments. Apparently these leaders thought that the Roman Catholic Church had really abandoned the 10 Commandments and they wanted to bring back some rules. They couldn't just focus on these rules, however, they also had some doomsday prophecies as well, like all good cults. They claimed that the apocalypse would come on December 31st, 1999, and in anticipation of this, a bunch of the members sold all of their possessions, so of course they were pretty irritated when the world in fact did not end. The leaders scrambled and instead altered their prediction, saying that the Virgin Mary would instead come on March 17th, 2000, and that she would bring them all to heaven. The followers continued to believe this, and on March 16th they had a huge feast. The following day, on March 17th, police arrived to where the cult resided and found that an explosion and fire had killed hundreds of members of the group. At first they thought that this could have been a voluntary event, but soon they saw the signs that pointed to this being a mass killing. The leaders likely took the lives of the followers because they could not pay them back, and they also knew that their quote-unquote prophecies were false. At first it was thought that the leaders were among those whose bodies were found, but that isn't quite the case. No one is exactly sure if they ended up losing their lives or if instead they fled the country, which many people believe. At this point there is still a warrant out for their arrest, so while the authorities have never officially confirmed that they are on the run, it is truly the most likely scenario. In our number 9 spot today, we have Karen Zerby. Karen is the leader of the cult now known as the Family of Love, which is much better known by its former name, the Children of God. In 1969, Karen joined a group called Teens for Christ and ended up becoming the personal secretary to David Berg, who was the one who founded the group. Eventually, David would divorce his wife in order to marry Karen. Karen had a son named Ricky, and his childhood was made into a book which was used to show other members of the cult how they should raise their children. children, but the book included some pretty horrific and disturbing content. At first, Karen wasn't around or extremely active in the cult, but she began to insert herself more and more and began making rules and enforcing discipline. Once David began to get sick in 1988, Karen took over the leadership position that she had been groomed for. After David passed away, she married another leader from the cult, and all the while Karen was extremely elusive. So much so that some of her followers didn't even know what she looked like. This cult has actually seen a few celebrities over the years. Jeremy Spencer, who is one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac, is a member of this cult. Joaquin Phoenix and his siblings were unfortunately subject to this terrible cult when they were growing up, but they all chose to leave later in life and as adults have spoken out about the cult. Unfortunately, Karen is still active as the cult's leader, even though she most definitely should be in prison, and she still remains in hiding, living off of what money she could collect from her followers. In our number 8 spot today, we have Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is the president of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, and is also serving a life plus 20-year sentence, which is exactly where he should be, but before being caught, he lived his life in hiding from the authorities, trying to flee the persecution he had to know was coming. His father was once the president of the cult, but when he passed away, the position was passed on to Warren. As new leader of the polygamous cult, he said that no one should even attempt to marry one of his father's widows, but just a few days later he himself married all of them except for 2 because one refused and then was banned from ever marrying again, and the other ran away. If your marriage proposal causes someone to flee the cult that they're in, you clearly aren't a very good person. Warren had the power to assign who would marry who, but he was also able to punish a man by taking his wives and children and assigning them to another man. As a man, you had to have at least 3 wives in order to get into heaven, but the more wives, the more likely it would be that you got into heaven. In 2005, the Texas authorities conducted a raid and took legal custody of 416 children after someone called in and tipped them off about all of the horrible things that were happening at the ranch. In 2006, Warren was arrested and is still serving his sentence. There is so much more to this case that we don't have the time to cover, but there was a documentary released this year called Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, which I would fully recommend if you want to know more about this horrible person. In our number 7 spot today, we have Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo. Adolfo was at one point a dealer and also the leader of a horrifying cult that was nicknamed by the media the Narco-Satanists. Adolfo's followers believed that he had magical abilities, but in the worst way possible. He required his followers to kidnap young men who Adolfo would practice horrible, sadistic rituals on and ultimately take their lives in order to replenish his magic. It's an absolutely horrific story, and this carried on for years until the disappearance of Mark Kilroy. Mark was a Texas college student who was in Mexico for some fun over spring break in 1989, but sadly during this trip he was taken by the cult's followers. Mark's friends quickly noticed his disappearance and began searching for him. This led to a border-crossing manhunt, and authorities quickly revealed what had been going on, but Adolfo had already fled. He and 4 of his followers fled to Mexico City, and this is how he was finally caught. Police were called to the apartment they were staying at as a result of a totally unrelated dispute, but because Adolfo knew they were looking for him, he just assumed that they were there for him and he opened fire with a machine gun. Not wanting to go to prison, he then handed the weapon over to one of his followers and asked him to open fire on himself, and by the time police were able to reach the apartment, he was already dead. In the end, 14 cult members were charged for the crimes relating to everything that went on. In our number 6 spot today, we have Shoko Asahara, leader of the Aum Shinrikyo cult and claiming to be the reincarnation of the Hindu god Shiva. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. He said he was destined to lead his followers to salvation once the apocalypse came, but then once he lured in followers, he claimed he could also teach them to levitate and develop telepathic abilities. Apparently those who were most skeptical, he allowed them to drink his bathwater. I have no idea why or what this was supposed to be for, and I wish I could unlearn it to be honest, but now we all have to suffer with that information together. The cult continued to grow and it drew in influential and wealthy people people, and what did Shoko do? He devised a plan and had a group go on to attack Tokyo in 1994, which took the lives of 7 people. Then in 1995 they released gas into the Tokyo underground, which led to 12 deaths, 50 injured people, and more than 5,000 people with temporary vision problems. Of course, this sent him into hiding as he didn't want to face the consequences of his actions. After several months, however, he was found hiding out in the group's compound near Mount Fuji. In the end, Asahara and 11 of his disciples ended up being arrested and charged, and they were all sentenced to death in 2004. In our number 5 spot today, we have David Koresh. You may also know him as Vernon Howell, but whatever you call him, he sucks. In the 1930s, Lois and Ben Rodin, who were the founders of the Branch DVians sect, believed that a new messiah would arrive. Shortly after this is when David joined the group and he began to get close to the pair. After Lois passed away, he managed to gain control of the following, and he changed his name to become the new leader and self-proclaimed messiah. Under the control of David, allegations of horrible crimes began to come out from the cult, and on February 28, 1993, there was a warrant issued for his arrest. But David wasn't about to give up that easily. David hid himself inside of a compound, and when the authorities came knocking, things escalated and there was a shootout in which 6 members of the group lost their lives, but so did 4 members of the ATF. Over 51 days there were negotiations being made with David while he continued to stall. It is said that this all finally came to an end when the FBI carried out a last mission to take members of the sect by force. This is when the compound they were in was set on fire and 76 members of the DVians, including David himself, perished. In our number 3 spot today, we have the True Russian Orthodox Church. Also known as Heavenly Jerusalem, this cult was an offshoot of the Russian Orthodox Church founded by Peter Kuznetsov. Back in 2007, there were about 30 members of this group that all went into hiding in a Russian cave, where Peter told them that they had to wait until the world ended in 2008. This one is a little different from the others on this list because while Peter put these members into the cave, he didn't go in there with them. After 2 members died in the cave, one passed from cancer and the other from starvation, some of the members ended up deciding to leave. Like, thank goodness. They ended up leaving because they were frightened of the toxic fumes that could come from the corpses. The other members in the cave only left after the roof of the cave started to collapse in 2008. In May of that year, after the bodies of those who had passed were removed by authorities, the cave was then blown up. In our number 2 spot today, we have Daniel Perez. Daniel Perez might be better known by his alias Lou Castro, but whatever you want to call him, he led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to just throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on being the worst. Basically, he had this clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies in order to live a lavish lifestyle. Like, as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so that he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. In 2010, Castro moved from Kansas to Tennessee and adopted a new identity, but he was soon arrested by the FBI for aggravated identity theft and fraudulent use of a social security card number. While serving time for this crime, it was discovered what his real name was, as well as the charges that had been placed against that former identity. Thankfully, in February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail.
Number 10. The Freedomites. After the Tsarist persecution in Russia, a group of pacifist anti-materialist Christians, referred to as spirit warriors, fled the country and came to Canada in the 20th century. While many were happy to just live freely off the land, a section of the group grew unhappy at the Canadians for asking them to attend school and enlist in the military. This group called themselves the Sons of Freedom, or Freedomites, and despite their name, wanted to impose their way of belief on others. They were most famous for their dislike of materialism, and would often show this by protesting in the complete nude. Many photos of the group of farmers marching in the nude became pretty famous and put the religion on the map. They didn't simply protest in the nude though, they took to another more violent outlet, arson, burning down many buildings including homes, schools, courtrooms, and bridges. This led to the persecution of the entire group, including the peaceful ones who hadn't been involved, and they were pretty much wiped out of the country. Number 6. Sinon. In 1958, Sinon was opened in Santa Monica, and it would be active there for over 30 years, having 1,300 members at its peak. This group mainly recruited addicts and took many different forms over its lifespan: a rehabilitation program, a utopian society, and a church. It was created by Charles Dedrich, and its staples were its focus on quitting cold turkey, tough love, and something called the game, where one member of the group opens up and the rest verbally attack them. Hundreds of people eventually moved in and paid to live there, Sinon at one point having around $33 million in assets. But Charles' greed and hunger for power only continued to grow, and the conditions in the place worsened over time, facing accusations of things like abduction and brainwashing. The lawsuit placed and won made Charles so angry that he got his followers to put a venomous snake in the man's mailbox, the man barely surviving. He was eventually arrested, and Sinon was shut down for the allegations and for tax fraud.